you can do if these categories are maintained to go from one state to the other. So the Eurocentric knowledge base had laid the intellectual foundation for the lawful seizure of land. Law and political might followed swiftly. So the academical, the intellectual towers preceded the war machine. In every single battle, thought proceeds before violence. The effect of this exclusion from humanity was to attach or transfer colonial character to the land these other bodies occupied. Terra nullius was used to grant legal title. To draw lines on the ground, to grant the capacity to draw lines on the ground, to take possession and control everything within those lines. So once the land is colonized, the non-recognized bodies could also be colonized and placed under subjection to law, order, and governance. Now, this is a legal paradox if you think about it. Even though underpinning the idea of terra nullius, the ability to get the land, that's the sort of the process by which the land was gotten. What follows on from that is the placing of subjection of the peoples on the land under the colonial order. So implicit in the non-recognition is also the idea that the recognition is false. Nevertheless, the law was used to create a system that was predicated on dehumanization. The withdrawal of humanity was a logical first step. Lines on the ground were drawn to demarcate territories subject to this non-recognition. Now, we should note that in the history of the world, there has never been a moment when the non-recognition that informed the colonial project has been overtly repudiated. There's no point in time where it has been acknowledged that non-recognition was a wrong thing to do. So the world has gone forward into this positive law position on states without challenging the ideological foundation upon which these states have been built. Such that the current nature and content of international law specifically, but also law generally, because there is a very strong relationship between them, if you want to, this is a whole lecture which I'm not going to go into, such that the current, but also law generally is inextricably connected and heavily influenced by colonization. The character of law is influenced by what it has been used to do. So therefore, the world as it stands now is influenced by the colonial encounter. Everywhere we stand is colonial ground. Everywhere we go, colonization follows us. Remember that the colonial state controlled commerce in ways that would not have been accepted in Europe. So this drew African colonies, African peoples into new sets of economic relations designed only to benefit the dominant classes of the colonizing state. And even though the colonies were not structured, regarded, or administered like Westphalian states, that's Europe and American states, this deficiency was only considered very briefly and in a trifling manner at the process of what is called political decolonization. And this process, as I'm sure many of us know, reached its high point in 1960. Now, despite the unraveling of colonization, the legal concept, and again, another legal concept of uti possidetis juris, which means as you possess under law, meant that inherited colonial boundaries remained unaltered. Colonial possessions were handed back to whom? You may ask. To ensure a continuous lineage of possession. This was agreed by all sides. According to Article 2 of the Organization of African Unity's resolution of 1964, all member states pledged themselves to respect the borders existing on the achievement of national independence. Is that independence if you can't change your borders?
Nope.
Uti possidetis juris is a long-standing legal principle based on the twin ideas of self-determination and non-interference. Its legal effect is a reaction or a counterpoint to terra nullius. The use of uti possidetis, I hate speaking Latin, by the way. The use of uti possidetis juris ensures that there is no terra nullius. It ensures that there is no legal vacuum between colony and state. According to Reisman, Uti bestowed an aura of historical legality to the expropriation of the lands of indigenous people. So again, there's no point in time where the taking of the land unjustly is recognized as unjust. The deployment of Uti was especially disingenuous for two reasons. First, it reinscribes and masks and entrenches the non-recognition of personhood. So the non-recognition of personhood is not repudiated, continues to exist, which was the basis of the declaration of terra nullius. If geographical spaces were wrongly declared terra nullius in the first place, then Uti possidetis is a legal impossibility. So either terra nullius was right or it was wrong. If it was right, then we are not people and we continue to be not people if the boundaries remain. And if it was wrong, then the whole concept, the whole foundation of nation state should not exist. True decolonization should have meant the reversal of the non-recognition and not its entrenchment. Secondly, using Uti to create nation states disregarded the nature of the preceding entity, colony, and the nature it was being asked to morph into, state, without anything in between. The crucial differences between the colonies and those states were disregarded. They had existed prior to the creation of, or prior to decolonization, specific criteria for the creation of states, including legal order and effectiveness. But decolonization was achieved, or this decolonization, which I will talk about in a little bit, by disregarding those criteria and creating states which were neither states nor prepared to be states, out of entities that were made for the very reason that they were not states.
Yes. Go on, sis, go on.
Thank you. So despite the fact that states were not prepared to become states, these states, and I'm always quite skeptical when talking about African states. Despite the fact that these states were unprepared, during the decolonization debate, this is the political decolonization, independence was perceived by the leaders of these African states as a condition to be attained very, very quickly, without prejudice to the size, composition, or viability of the state or the capacity of its leaders, and how these leaders were chosen is again a different argument, or the propensity for violent conflict upon independence. Like the Ethiopian delegate at the debate stated the African position as follows. All peoples under colonial rule prefer poverty in freedom to wealth in slavery, and they will definitely prefer fighting in freedom to peace in slavery. My argument here would be freedom has to be complete or else it isn't freedom. Nevertheless, by retaining the nation boundaries of colonial entities, what African states got at independence was not freedom, but entrapment into borders that could not of themselves become viable states. I'm going to very quickly talk about the social contract theory here. So the social contract theory is one of the main bases for the theories of statehood. And the idea is there is a social contract between the people and the states. People give up their freedoms to the states, and the state therefore takes care or ensures their security. The basis of this is the prior state of humanity. So people like, again, John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Thomas Hobbes, they argue that the prior state, the natural state of man, is anarchy. So people then give up their, to avoid this anarchy or to evade this anarchy, people give up their rights and freedoms to the state, and the state ensures that there is no anarchy, that they are secure. But this theory was formulated at the same time as and developed together with the non-recognition of personhood that enabled the slave trade and later colonization. So peoples who were considered colonizable presented social contractarians with supposedly living evidence of the uncivilized state of nature. Or as De Souza Santos states, the theories of the social contract of the 17th and 18th centuries are important for what they say as what they silence. What they say is modern individuals, that is metropolitan men, enter into social contract in order to abandon the state of nature to form civil society. What they do not say is that a massive world region given over to the state of nature is thereby being created. So by saying certain peoples are civilized, you are saying anyone who doesn't conform to our ideas of civilization is therefore uncivilized. So a state of nature to which millions of human beings are condemned and left without any possibility of escaping via the creation of civil society. According to Santos, the impact of the formulation of social contract theory was to consign the global south to ideological anarchy. Or as Nichols states, the social contract was conceived to exclude indigenous people from the international arena, as Hobbes and Locke were implicitly referring to indigenous Amerindians as those who exist in a state of nature. So there were specific people they were thinking about existing in a state of nature. Therefore, the social contract theory ignores the anarchy inherent in humanity, and then in certain regions creates the fiction of a state of nature, which no such thing really exists, which it suggests it is eradicating, which it doesn't really do. Also problematic is the fact that it is impossible to locate with any definition who Africans surrendered their freedom to based on social contract theory. I have to go past this pretty quickly. Did they surrender their freedoms to the colonial state, the European colonizer, or vague approximation of an international community? The social contract theory does not work for the post-colonial nation state. I'm going to jump over a few things because Kenny has indicated to me that I've run out of time. Okay, so I'll continue from this point. So at the heart of the colonial moment is a clash of constructed civilizations. What has happened is the African civilizations have been subsumed into a Western one. And at the center of this moment is epistemic violence, the killing of knowledges. As Tocqueville stated, colonization is not a matter of creating a new people with its own laws, its customs, its interests, and sooner or later separate nationality, but of implanting in Africa a population that resembles us in everything. So that disparity between Africa and the West persists because colonization, the forced replication, was an incomplete affair. It was focused on coastlines, ignored the rural areas, which didn't have any exploitable resources. It is also incomplete because decolonization happened before complete duplication. So decolonization itself, this political decolonization, is an incomplete process because political decolonization focused on declaring colonization was ended rather than actually ending it. So the declaration was meant to suffice. Therefore, African ways of governance and constituting society still persevere, and they coexist unequally with the Eurocentric models in the same space, like eternal tendrils of smoke from an unseasoned flame. African societies and philosophies, though varied, mostly centered humanity over property and hardly had any straight state lines. So theories such as Ubuntu, Jama, Munabwike, and there are many, many others, illustrate African ideological belief in the predominance of the community and the family, the belief that all people within the community should work for the advancement of the community, promote collectivism and harmony, and frown on individualism. Very quickly, I'm slightly trying to summarize why I think the tribe is not an adequate descriptor. I'm just going to say that very briefly. You can ask me questions about that. So most people think that, okay, if we ignore the post-colonial nation state, then we can go back to the tribe. But the problem, of course, is that the word and the concept of tribe carries within it so much of the colonial narrative that it is an unreliable narrative of reality.
That's right.
Tribe is an inexact descriptor. It does not correlate to size or composition or internal homogeneity. It obfuscates reality and history. It fetishizes African traditions. and carries within it the pejoratives of outdated social theory, including primitiveness and savagery. Tribe arises directly out of the racial categories which served as justification for colonization. Most African languages have no single word for tribe, or any word that is similar to tribe. Words used by Africans to self-identify or self-describe their political constitutions are more similar to peoples or nations.
That's right.
The colonial creation of tribe basically replicates the colonial creation of state, in that it traps what was once fluid into cultural and nationalistic borders that they did not choose. It prevents agency, change, and development. It is the starting point of epistemic violence. The creation of the tribe is a sub-step in the creation of state, and thus the decolonization of tribe should be part of the decolonization of knowledge of Africa. African decolonization is incomplete in a Fanonian sense because the colonial situation is maintained by lines on the ground. Incomplete decolonization takes us back to the economic motivations for colonization. Okay. Very briefly going to the last two slides. So on Pan-Africanism, so decolonization, according to Tucker Yang, who wrote a very beautiful article called Decolonization is Not a Metaphor, and I would suggest very strongly that we stop using decolonization as a metaphor for social change or social justice.
That's right.
Tucker Yang state very categorically that decolonization specifically requires the repatriation of indigenous land and life. So the question before us then is what a repatriation of African life could or would look like. In effecting decolonization, we must consider critically the genesis and the nature of the African post-colonial state and the consequences of that process coming to be. Pan-Africanism, I believe, is one of the ways forward out of where we are with the post-colonial nation state. As we are all Pan-Africanisms, I'm not going to preach to the choir and tell us how beautiful Pan-Africanism is. But in 1963, Kwame Nkrumah proposed a Pan-African Union that would have a common foreign policy and diplomacy, a common continental planning for economic and industrial development, and a common currency and monetary zone and a central bank, as well as a common defense system. The question is, where do we go from here? How do we go forward together? So his vision obviously is very different from what became the OAU.
That's right.
When we're talking about Pan-Africanism, we're not talking about what became the OAU.
That's right.
Should focus not on what happens at the top, that's what our African leaders do, but what happens at the bottom. Can we come together at the bottom? And solidarity and pluralism are at the heart of Pan-African movements. So any study of Africa that only studies the failure of African states is not a true study of Africa. It is incomplete because it studies it is a study of the scars on the ground without questioning what put them there and who is affected by them. Africans are trapped in an ideological movement of the non-recognition of personhood that persists. We are trapped by a declaration of statehood that does not create statehood. Decolonization should undo both the state and international law, as well as its creations. The international architecture prevents Africa from developing within the imaginaries of freedom. But Pan-Africanism gives us the starting point to have discussions that can challenge the nature of law, knowledge of Africa, and modernity. Pan-Africanism gives us some hope for future freedoms. And very lastly, this is an open invitation for FACE 2019. I have to include this in all my talks. So 8th of June 2019, we are going to be talking about how we build Pan-African-inspired multiversity knowledges and true knowledges about Africa and moving forward for freedom. Because I've run out of time. Thank you very much for listening.
Take 3 questions at a time.
May I apologise for not hearing all of your clearly excellent presentation.
Indeed.
I think for me, part of the problem is that there may be too much in it, not just in the presentation, but in what you're trying to hold together. I'm surprised that law, on your account of the matter, is only just arriving at the realization of the racism of the founding fathers of Enlightenment European philosophy. But I'm sure law arrived at that a long time ago. The let's call it third world is more than Africa, and that's acknowledged in your your presentation. But the people who went abroad from here went on the basis of very clear conceptions, not just of tribes and peoples, but of land ownership. And in places like India, they divested ordinary folk of land, which to fit a model of land ownership that they brought to them from here. In Africa, the situation was, for me, slightly different. What was at stake was land that the people from here wanted was taken via notions initially of crown land and then private property, which violated all notions of land ownership. And then the land that they didn't take, there are issues. The key issue there is what the conception of land ownership that the peoples, tribes, if you will, peoples of Africa have. And I don't know that you address that as I would like to hear it. The other problem for the international system is that in most of the concepts of land ownership that indigenous peoples have, land isn't a private commodity and therefore cannot be connected to banks and economic exploitation and that kind of stuff. And it seems to me that much more of that needed to be in your presentation. Maybe it is, I don't know.
Right, how many hands have we got? How many questions have we got? Can we take? You got them. Right, you take? We take it. Do you start asking the next one. You pick the next one.
My sister, good morning to you and thanks for the presentation. I have been on a search now for the past 3 years to find out if the legal enactment of 1661 that started in Barbados but was actually supported by the monarchy, the parliament and the church here in the UK as it relates to the dehumanization of African people. Now, I have been doing a search for the past 3 years to find out if it was actually repealed. But judging from your presentation this morning, it seems to be a very live and active entity which continues to strip and to dehumanize African people of their humanity, therefore of their international legal personality and their right to nationhood. From your presentation, is my assumption then right that it actually hasn't been repealed, but it's very much alive and well?
Take another one.
Again, I came in a little bit late to the presentation, but I found it interesting and informative. I'm particularly keen and eager to see how we move forward, because we seem to be on a bit of a treadmill here. And if you look at the situation for African descendants in this country, it's abysmal. If you look at all of the indices in relation to disproportionality, we continue to suffer institutional racism. So what I'm concerned about is, yes, how can we learn from the past to move forward? But what practical strategies can we start to implement to move forward? That's what I'm interested in, sir.
It's up to you. You want to take all of them?
Yeah, take all of them. The lady at the back,
yeah, I was interested in what you were saying about in terms of decolonisation and colonisation, and what happened to the 60s when independence was gone. In that, if I recall, there was a movement to get rid of the boundaries prior to the 1960 liberation. So the West Africa movement, wasn't that, like with Wasu, and so wasn't that an attempt to get rid of the colonial boundary, even though the movement itself was somewhat colonial, it was an attempt to get rid of the old bounds, the colonial boundary, I think.
First of all, thank you for an excellent talk with very clear ideas expressed brilliantly. I really appreciate that. There was one line on one of your slides, which is, so who does the land belong to? Which we could spend a whole month discussing. But my question is, if we challenge the idea of owning land, would that make a change in people's attitude to how we deal with the earth? Are we allowed to pollute? What should be handed on to the next generation? It would be in a whole different mindset.
I sit in a very peculiar position. Land is always very present in my train of thoughts. I shared with Cecil's questions to you. And this is the young man here who was talking about. I'm just making fun. But, I don't know where to start. Within my society, there is something they call government law. It's so stupid that they said, which African government brought land from heaven? They say, this is my land. And what's the basis of government? So if the law, as you can see, I'm sure that you read Saba and so on, we're challenging this right in the end of the 19th century and so on. The question is, what do we do? As you said, what do we do about it? Because the contract framework of land is missing. We can deal with it in the dry state. Land doesn't belong to me. It belongs to my ancestors. Give it to me first to keep for those coming after me. Then we bring British laws and so on, which are still being used, all British and French laws, in the action of land. And in Ghana, for example, now you hear people say, "Oh, I bought a land." How can you buy something? I mean, and I sit down every day and see that it's in the, what do you call it? For the benefit of those who are oppressors, the internal oppressors, to keep on doing these kind of things. So how do we get out of it? And I'm glad that laws, well, I'm talking about law in my paper towards the end. Somebody wrote a paper, I wrote a paper, a law paper, and then the question that I asked from the lawyers was that, does this mean that we have to scrap the law? Yes. Revolution. But I asked the question to one of, in a fellowship that we have, I asked the question, I said, I've been in 10 years. You need to reformulate the law from an African point of view. Locke, Rousseau, all of them have absolutely nothing to do with me. Talk about the petition of the Bill of Rights. In my culture, who am I petitioning for rights? And you'll be saying that in court. And that's what you learn. The law that we have is against the people of Africa. Yes. It's against Pan-African personality. Yes. It's against Pan-Africanism. Period.
I just firstly want to join everybody in thanking you for the insight that you've provided today. My question, well, I've got a couple, but the first one is really around the fact that working in our community and coming across our people, particularly those of us from the continent, you come across this idea that the idea of African, is something that is imposed on people from the motherland, primarily by utopianists, Pan-Africanists from the diaspora, and then you have writers like Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie who affirm the idea that the essential identity for people on the continent is the tribe, and so in terms of forwarding a Pan-African agenda, how do we overcome that particular thing? And finally, in relation to what the sister was asking earlier, I'm going to ask you to consider the Ghana-Guinea-Mali Union in your answer to that. And with regards to, I was having a conversation with my brother over here yesterday about the AU, and their agenda for 2063. And so, say again?
2063.
Yeah, 2063. So in relation to what you said about the OAU, how would you what's your appraisal of the AU and their 2063 agenda?
I'll come back to that. Yeah, well, a lot of the questions about land, so I'm going to try and answer all those ones first, and then discuss the case of the other. And I think we should start, and which is why I said my research is about the nature of law, and the nature of law also relates to the nature of land, and I think we haven't really, and that's the problem, we haven't really addressed that. The idea that the way in which land was used and the questions, the ideas of owning property are completely outside the African knowledge system. Nobody owns property. The question of one person owning something was completely outside of African understanding.
Yeah.
Now, what we have, and this is what I was trying to say, and I actually only got through half of my paper, but yeah, you would have fallen asleep anyway.
You wouldn't assist, don't worry about that.
So, but what we have now is a marriage that doesn't make any sense. So ideas, conceptions, practices, cultures that are African, but working within an European legal framework. So obviously it's not working. And the evidence is on the news. If you look at anything, from Africa, this is part of the major part of the problem is the problem of land. Who owns the land in itself, I would say, is probably a wrong question, because the presumption is, it's a legal question. The presumption is that land has to be owned. But of course, the other problem we have is, and sort of alluding to what you're saying, we cannot go back to the past. Because the past, technically and sadly, has been lost to us. We haven't kept enough of the past for it to be a viable destination. So the question is, what's the future? And a lot of the questions were about how do we go forward. So the question of the land, I think we have to think together about what we want to see, and we have to do this together. Now, I'm trying to talk about land and future at the same time. It's slightly confusing in my head. I'll try and break down what I'm trying to say. Now, the thing is, our togetherness is often interrupted by the lines on the ground. So the question of land is actually integral to where we are going in the future, even though it is not often argued in that way. So where are we from? We usually relate that to what we own, where what we own is. But if we disrupt the philosophical and legal ideas of ownership and belonging, and we belong together as a people, then we begin to interrupt the legal imperatives of how this world is structured. The structure of the world is not sustainable for African people. The only way we can go forward is to decide together, and that is the very difficult thing, because you've got Chimamanda saying one thing about her tribe, and a lot of that is, as I already argued, and I don't want to go over that again, but as I already argued, it is a colonial construct, but we have taken it and adopted it and said it's ours. And like I said, the past cannot be returned to, but we can learn lessons from it. And that's why I said I do not prescribe, to my very first statement, as you said, you came in late, I do not prescribe entirely specific what we have to do. But to go forward, we do have to completely understand where we have been. If not, every destination would be false. And that's the problem now. We're going round and round. It's like we are at a fixed morphing point. We keep on changing. We say it's progress, but all we're doing is dancing around the same table in finer and finer clothes. But we need to decide together what kind of world we want to see based on who we have been, who our people have been. The question for me is, how do we build these solidarities? Until we build these solidarities and come to some agreement, we cannot draw a roadmap for the future. And which is why I do not want to prescribe. I may have some idea of this is where this is what we should do. But in reality, it will not fit with the dreams, desires, hopes, wishes, aspirations of my people together. So we need to build these dreams together, and that's what we need to start doing now, building our solidarities and stop bickering over petty divisions about what is within our understanding. And going back to the idea of protecting the environment, again going back to the concept of land. If land is not owned, or if the concept of ownership is, and if you talk to the indigenous Australian and people from New Zealand as well, land isn't owned, it's kept in trust for people in the future. Then you have a responsibility to keep it safe for the future, for future generations. Then you will not pollute, because that is your responsibility. But if you have the idea, the legal concept of one individual can actually own this land, I mean, that is audacious actually, thinking that you can own this. Nobody can own the land. The land is its own thing. We only have responsibility for it. And this is why we're destroying it, because we think we own it. But all we're doing is setting a roadmap for our own destruction. So I think if we return or learn from philosophies of the past, actually recognize that they are important. Indigenous populations understood the necessities of preserving land. Now we're getting to know that we are acting as if these are new revelations. They are not new revelations. They are things which people with wisdom have known and have passed on, but they were said to be uncivilized because they were not using land properly. Properly was destroyed, is now destroying the earth. Who's using the land properly? Yeah, there was a question about the 1661 Dehumanization Act. As far as I know, it hasn't been repealed, but I do not know that categorically. The problem with the law is, especially the common law, which is what we, not just the UK, but American or formerly colonized nations, the law is based on precedent. Even if it has been repealed, the nature of the law lives on. So if dehumanization was in one law, it would be carried over into the other. So even if it hasn't been repealed, it is against the nature of the law. Whose question haven't I answered? Yes, the Guinea, Ghana, West African movement. Now I'm West African myself, and having a West African passport, being able to travel across West Africa is a good thing, but that is the only thing. So there is no sort of proper relationship in West Africa to actually move forward with that idea. So I think the idea starts off well, but it needs to be instrumentalized. Now, one of my uncles is a general in the army, Nigerian army. Now, he's retired now, so ages ago, before he became a general, when he was actually in active service, they had a West African, so you may have heard of ECOMOG, so he was one of the officers in ECOMOG. And what he said was, there was a major problem about language communication. So even the most fundamental things could not be done because those who had been colonized by the British could only speak English. Those who had been colonized by the French could only speak French. And those who had been colonized by the Portuguese, well, there are only two countries, so they felt pretty left out anyway, two very small countries. So there's no instrumental togetherness being built, apart from the fact that you can travel from one country to the other with a passport. More needs to be done. The AU, I think, is messed up. Because the AU is not, I mean, there are lots and lots of, pretty words being said, but they're getting a lot of their funding from China. They're not really going down to the nitty-gritty and ensuring proper intra-African collaboration. They're patterning themselves against, like the EU, not recognizing that our people have different histories, philosophies, and desires and aspirations. Who is listening to the people? Now, I always leave people with the reading. Sorry, lecture. So one of the articles that I always ask my students to read, like to definitely read, is Gatry, Spivak, Can the Subaltern Speak? Now, argument very briefly is there are people within society whose voices are not being heard. People are talking for them. The African woman who works on a farm, who works in a rural area, anywhere in Africa, who is speaking for her? And this is the thing the AU hasn't done. I am still speaking for people whose voices haven't been heard, and this is again why I do not prescribe roadmaps, because we have to hear everybody's voices before we know where we are going. So the AU, on that point, completely messed up. Thank you for listening.